A strange thing has happened inside modern homes. The closets are bigger, the kitchens have more cabinets. There are garage shelves, plastic bins, spare rooms, storage benches, and furniture made to hide things inside it. Yet many people still feel surrounded. A hallway closet will not close. The kitchen counter disappears under papers and gadgets. A chair in the bedroom becomes a second closet. A basket in the laundry room turns into 3. For all the extra space, the house still feels crowded. Now think about many 1950s homes. They were smaller, tighter, and far less forgiving. A family could live in a house with one bathroom, modest closets, a narrow kitchen, and very little hidden storage. That did not make life easy. Still, it did something powerful. If old household wisdom still matters to you, subscribe and stay close. So many of these quiet systems were never fancy, but they solved problems that still wear people down every single week. What made many 1950s housewives seem almost ruthless was not that they were born more organized. It was that they lived in homes where clutter could not pretend to be harmless for very long. A pile on the table was not just a pile. It meant the table could not be used for supper, bills, folding clothes, or even just clearing the space, or helping a child with homework. A crowded counter was not just visual mess. It got in the way of peeling potatoes, packing lunches, wiping surfaces, and keeping the kitchen workable. In a smaller house, every flat surface had a job. Every drawer mattered. Every wasted inch caused friction. Today, clutter often survives because it can hide. It slips into decorative baskets, extra cabinets, underbed containers, garage tubs, and overstuffed closets. It looks under control because it is out of sight. But out of sight is not the same as solved. That is why so many modern decluttering efforts feel exhausting. People move things, sort things, label things, and buy containers for things they never truly decided on. The house looks better for a moment, then the same weight settles back in. Many women in the 1950s had no patience for that kind of delay because their homes gave them fewer chances to delay anything. That is where the first ruthless trick comes in. It was not cute and it was not gentle, it was simple. Bring the clutter into the open. The kitchen table was often the place not the back of a shelf, not a cardboard box pushed into a bedroom corner. The table. That was where things had to be seen. A housewife could gather the loose papers, odd tools, unmatched lids, folded table linens, stray socks, unopened mail, old magazines, small toys, sewing items, recipe clippings, and all the little objects that had drifted through the house and lost their purpose. Then she put them where they could not be ignored. This was not done to make a bigger mess. It was done to stop the house from lying. That first trick could be called the kitchen table reckoning. Everything had to face daylight. When clutter stays hidden, it keeps its mystery. It feels less real. Once it lands on the table, it becomes plain. 5 pens that do not work. 3 gravy boats nobody used. Buttons without shirts. Lids without bowls. Coupons long expired. In that bright, ordinary space, clutter loses its excuses. Did your mother or grandmother ever use the kitchen table like a command center when the house got out of hand? The reason this worked so fast is almost embarrassingly simple. Hidden clutter feels like a future problem. Visible clutter feels like a present one. A woman standing in a 1950s kitchen often did not have the luxury of leaving the table buried for a week. Meals had to happen there. Clothes might need folding there. A child might need to sit there after school. The table was active territory. So once the clutter arrived, decisions had to follow. And that leads to the second ruthless trick. No object was allowed to drift forever. It had to have one. Many 1950s women followed a hard rule, even if they never said it out loud. If something had no home, it had no right to stay in the middle of the house. That meant no endless, "I'll deal with it later" piles. No random objects traveling from room to room for weeks. No basket of things that belonged somewhere else, but never made it there. A hairbrush belonged in a bathroom drawer or on a vanity. Scissors belonged in one drawer, not 5. A serving dish belonged in a cabinet, not in a stack on top of the refrigerator because there was nowhere else for it. A coat belonged on a hook or in a closet, not hanging over a dining chair until it became part of the furniture. This no second home rule kept clutter from multiplying in a quiet way. The moment an object begins living in 2 or 3 temporary, a handbag on the table becomes mail next to the handbag, then receipts under the mail, then a pair of sunglasses, then loose change, then something else. One item with no home invites 5 more. That chain reaction was harder to tolerate in a smaller house, so women often cut it off early. The item went where it belonged, or it was exposed as something the house was not built to carry. Modern homes often do the opposite. They create soft landing spots for unfinished decisions. A bench catches coats in the entryway. A basket catches papers and mail. A corner catches donations that never leave. A guest room catches everything that does not fit anywhere else. It looks harmless at first. You just returned it. That made daily life lighter. It also made it painfully obvious when too many things were competing for the same shelf, drawer, hook, or cabinet. And that is when the deeper problem finally came into focus. After the table revealed the clutter and the house demanded a real home for every object, one question grew impossible to avoid. Maybe the problem was not only where these things belonged, maybe some of them did not belong there at all. Once the clutter was out in the open, the comforting lies started to fall apart. It is easy to feel attached to a crowded drawer when the drawer stays closed. It is easy to think a closet is manageable when the door still shuts. It is easy to believe the house only needs a little organizing, when most of the problem is hidden behind. But once everything is visible, the real trouble looks different. The house is not full because every item is precious. It is full because too many things were allowed to stay long after they stopped being useful. This is where many 1950s housewives became far firmer than modern decluttering advice tends to be. Today, people are often told to make peace with their belongings, to go slowly, to avoid pressure, to keep things if they might one day serve a purpose. There is nothing wrong with being thoughtful. Still, that softness can turn clutter into a permanent negotiation. In many 1950s homes, there was less room and less patience for endless negotiation. If something no longer pulled its weight, it became a burden on the whole room. One of the clearest examples was the way duplicates were treated. A modern house can hold 5 spatulas, 6 coffee mugs no one likes, 3 can openers, stacks of chipped bowls, backup scissors in every drawer, and half-working tools scattered through the kitchen, garage, and laundry room. Because there is storage space, these extras often stay, but older homes did not always make that easy. Space had to be defended. So many women learned a hard lesson. One good item was better than 4 weak ones. That third trick could be called the duplicate purge. It sounds severe, but it was often just practical. If one broom swept well, why keep 2 battered ones leaning in a corner? If one stock pot was the one always used, why let 3 dented extras crowd the lower cabinet? If one pair of sewing scissors actually worked, why keep 3 dull pairs tangled in a drawer with duplicates? Were not comforting in a small house. They were crowding out the things that mattered. The deeper reason this worked is that duplicates create visual and mental fog. They make it harder to see what is actually needed. A drawer with one reliable tool feels calm. A drawer packed with versions of the same tool feels confused. The same thing happens in closets, linen cabinets, and pantry shelves. 5 nearly identical tablecloths, stacks of unmatched food containers, old handbags saved for no clear reason, 10 dish towels when 4 would do. The house starts carrying extras simply because nobody stopped to ask whether the extras had earned their space. And the duplicate purge did more than clear shelves. It sharpened the household. It made daily life easier to manage. Would your home feel lighter if every category had one favorite and one backup instead of a whole crowd? Right beside duplicates sat another clutter trap. And this one may have been even more dangerous because it wore the mask of good intentions. Broken things often stayed in the house because they came with a promise. A torn dress promised to be mended. A lamp promised to be fixed. A chair with a weak leg promised to be repaired. A toaster with a problem promised to be looked at one day. In theory, this sounded sensible. People in the 1950s did mend and repair more than many people do now. But that does not mean broken things were allowed to sit forever like ghosts of unfinished chores. That is where the fourth trick comes in. A broken thing was given a short future. It was repaired soon, placed in a real mending basket with a purpose, or removed. It did not get endless mercy. That is an important difference. The old habit was not save everything because it might be repaired. The habit was repair it or stop pretending. This rule protected the home from a special kind of guilt clutter. Broken things carry emotional weight. They whisper that someone is being wasteful if they let them go. They also whisper that a better version of the future is just around the corner. A future where there is suddenly time to sew that button, tighten that hinge, reglue that handle, patch that hem, or sort that box of lonely parts. But week after week, the future does not arrive. Meanwhile, the broken item keeps taking up space in a drawer, basket, garage. A 1950s housewife knew that repair had to live inside rhythm, or it would turn into storage. A mending basket was not supposed to become an archive of neglected fabric. It was supposed to move. A tool bench was not supposed to become a graveyard of things waiting for miracles. It was supposed to produce results. That old discipline made clutter easier to cut because it stripped away false hope. And then there was the most slippery category of all. Not broken, not duplicate, not even useless in a strict sense, just waiting for a version of life that never quite arrives. This was the territory of someday items, someday dresses for events that never came, someday fabric for sewing projects never started, someday serving pieces for guests who rarely visited, someday furniture for a room that might be someday jars, someday baskets, someday craft supplies, someday buttons, someday frames, someday books, someday plans. These objects often survive longer than broken things because they feel innocent. Hope is hard to throw away. That fifth trick was the someday test, and it could be ruthless in the best sense. A woman had to ask plain questions. When will this be used? Where exactly will it live until then? What is the real plan? Not the imagined plan, the real one. If there was no answer, then the object was no longer a useful possession. It was a fantasy wearing a household label. This may have been one of the greatest hidden strengths of smaller 1950s homes. They did not have enough room to store every possible future identity. The house could not comfortably hold a sewing room dream, a fancy hostess dream, especially if daily life was already pressing against every drawer and shelf. So choices had to become clearer. The woman did not keep every path open forever. She picked what fit the home and let the rest go. Modern houses often absorb those postponed dreams more quietly. An attic keeps them. A basement protects them. A spare closet hides them. A storage unit extends them. The result is not always comfort. Sometimes it is a low, constant pressure, the feeling that the house is full of decisions waiting to be made. By this stage of the old sorting process, something important had changed. The house was no longer being treated like a museum for extra objects or unfinished intentions. It was being brought back to use. But the next layer of clutter was even more stubborn because it did not come from rare hopes or broken promises. It came from the things touched so often that people stopped noticing how fast they multiplied. By the time a house reached this stage, the most obvious clutter had usually been exposed. The broken things had been questioned. The duplicates had started to thin out. The hopeful someday items had lost some of their power. But many women in the 1950s understood that the hardest clutter was often not the dramatic kind. It was not the strange object in the back of a closet or the forgotten box in a spare room. It was the everyday clutter, the things used so often that they slipped past notice. That is why a home could look busy even when no one thought of it as cluttered. Shirts draped over a chair, shoes gathering near a door, papers moving from one surface to another, kitchen tools piling up because they looked useful. The problem was not only what the family owned, it was what daily life kept scattering faster than anyone was correcting it. That is where the sixth ruthless trick comes in, the laundry basket limit. In many homes now, baskets have become part of the furniture. They sit in bedrooms, laundry rooms, bathrooms, and hallway corners as if they belong there permanently. One basket fills up, then another appears. Clean clothes wait to be folded. Folded clothes wait to be put away. Worn clothes hang over chairs because they are not dirty enough yet. The whole system becomes soft around the edges. Clothing starts living everywhere. Many 1950s housewives were stricter because they had to be. Clothing was often more limited. Closets were smaller. Dressers had to work harder. Laundry took time and effort. A full basket was not treated as background scenery. It was a signal. Something was off. Either there were too many clothes in circulation, too many pieces not being put away, or too little discipline around what stayed in the household. The power of the laundry basket limit was that it exposed excess fast. If drawers were stuffed, hangers crowded, and baskets still overflowing, then the family did not just have a laundry problem, they had a clothing problem. Too many items were competing for too little order. A 1950s woman might not have said it in those exact words, but the rule was plain. Clothes had to be worn, washed, mended, handed down, or removed. They were not supposed to hover in a half-finished state across the room. This rule also protected the feeling of the house. A chair with one sweater on it may seem harmless. Then it becomes 2 shirts, a skirt, a robe, and yesterday's laundry. A bedroom starts looking tired, even when it is technically not dirty. In smaller houses, that visual drag mattered. Every room had less spare space to absorb neglect. So clothes were forced back into rhythm. Once that rhythm slipped, clutter spread quickly. And that same pattern showed up in a second daily category that can make even a tidy home feel chaotic: paper. Paper clutter may be one of the quietest ways a house fills up. It arrives without much drama. A receipt in a pocket, a school form on the counter, a note near the phone, a magazine by a chair, a grocery list half tucked under a bowl, an envelope opened but not answered, a manual saved for an appliance nobody uses anymore. The pieces are thin, light, and easy to ignore. Yet over time, they form a layer over the house, a dry little snowfall of postponed decisions. That is why the 7th Ruthless trick worked so well. It was the paper bag sweep, not a fancy filing system, not color-coded folders for every category of life. Just a fast gathering method with only a few outcomes. Papers were picked up, brought together, and sorted with plain choices. Keep and file, act on it, throw it away, that was it. The strength of that rule came from speed. A 1950s housewife often understood that paper became dangerous when it was allowed to spread thinly across many surfaces. One stack in one place was manageable. 20 little stacks all over the house were exhausting. Get the paper into one spot, make it answer for itself. A bill had a reason to stay. An expired flyer did not. A letter worth keeping could be put away. A scrap with no purpose could leave. Do you remember a house where paperwork did not seem to spill into every room? In many older homes, paper had less permission to stay visible. The kitchen table, sideboard, or desk might carry some of it for a short time, but it was not supposed to become a paper habitat. Once paper took over a surface, the whole room started to feel mentally crowded. And that brings us to one of the sharpest old rules of all, one that could transform a kitchen faster than almost anything else. The counter had to stay useful. This was the 8th trick, and it sounds simple because it is simple. A counter was a workspace, not a holding zone. In many 1950s homes, kitchen counters were not generous. That meant every inch mattered. A woman needed room to peel potatoes, mix batter, cool a pie, pack lunches, wipe surfaces, sort groceries, or set down dishes after washing them. If the counter filled with mail, jars waiting to be reused, small appliances, coupon piles, handbags, vitamins, loose recipes, and random objects from other rooms, then the kitchen stopped serving the family well. The old rule was not about making the kitchen look like a magazine. It was about function. A clear counter made work easier. A crowded counter turned every meal into a nuisance. That is part of why clutter often felt more serious in the past. One corner becomes a charging station. Another becomes a paper drop. A section by the stove holds oils, vitamins, and odds and ends. The toaster stays out. Then the blender joins it. Then a basket appears for things that need to go upstairs. Before long, the counter no longer belongs to cooking. It belongs to overflow. Which surface in your home gives up first when life gets busy? Is it the kitchen counter, the dining table, the dresser, or that chair in the bedroom? That question mattered because daily clutter followed habits. It followed weak spots, places where the home silently said, "Leave it here for now." 1950s housewives learned to correct weak spots quickly, not because they loved cleaning, but because they knew small piles become room problems before anyone admits it. By now, the house was beginning to change. Clothes were being forced back into rhythm. Paper had fewer places to breed. Kitchen surfaces were being reclaimed for real work. But none of these gains would last unless the house had one last defense, a simple habit that stopped clutter from rebuilding itself the moment the 48 hours were over. The hardest part of clearing a house is not the first burst of effort. It is what happens after. Anyone can fill donation bags for a day, clear a counter for an afternoon, or make a closet look better for one evening. The real test comes the next morning, then the next week, then the next month. When ordinary life starts dropping its little trail again. Shoes by the door, a cup on the side table, a folded sweater on a chair, mail left near the kitchen, hairbrush on the bathroom sink, toys, receipts, newspapers, towels, boxes, little objects with no clear ending. That is the point where many homes slowly slide back into the same shape they had before. The dramatic clutter may be gone, but the daily drift begins its quiet work all over again. Many 1950s housewives understood something that modern organizing culture often forgets. A clean-looking home was not usually the result of heroic effort repeated once in a while. It was the result of small corrections made before the mess had time to grow roots. That is why the 9th Ruthless trick may have mattered more than all the others. It was not really a decluttering event, it was a daily defense. This was the evening walkthrough. At the end of the day, before the house settled fully into night, a woman would move through the main spaces and correct what had drifted. Not scrub the whole kitchen from top to bottom, not empty every drawer, not begin some giant late-night cleaning project, just correct. A cup went back to the sink. A folded blanket was returned to the sofa or chair where it belonged. Shoes were lined up or put away. A newspaper was stacked, tossed, or folded. The handbag left on the table went back to its hook, shelf, or closet. A child's sweater was carried to the bedroom. A towel hanging wrong in the bathroom was straightened. A few bits of mail were gathered and placed where paper was supposed to be handled. This may sound almost too small to matter, but that was the genius of it. Small corrections are exactly what stop clutter from becoming a rescue mission. A 1950s housewife often knew that yesterday's drift becomes tomorrow's burden. If a coat stayed on a dining chair overnight, it could be joined by a purse, then a folded blouse, then some papers, then something from the laundry basket. If a few dishes lingered too long, they shaped the feeling of the whole kitchen. If newspapers, magazines, or loose mail stayed out for days, they began to claim the room around them. The evening walkthrough was not only about appearance, it was about protecting momentum. Once a room slipped out of shape, people treated it differently. They became looser with their habits because the room already looked slightly off. One object out of place gave permission to another. That is one of the cruel things about clutter. It teaches the home to lower its standards little by little. A quick nightly correction interrupted that lesson before it spread. This is also why so many old homes felt calmer, even when they were not grand or luxurious. The calm did not always come from expensive furniture or perfect decoration. It came from the fact that the room had been restored to itself at the end of the day. The table looked like a table again. The chair looked like a chair again. The counter looked ready for breakfast. That quiet reset gave the family a different start the next morning. Would your home feel different if each room was gently put back into place before bed, even for 10 minutes? For many women in the 1950s, that 10-minute instinct made the difference between a home that stayed manageable and one that kept asking for full-scale rescue. And this is where the deeper lesson of all 9 tricks becomes clear. The old system worked because it did not wait for disaster. It did not wait until the closet was impossible. The drawer could not close. The counter disappeared, or the laundry basket multiplied into a row. It acted earlier. The kitchen table reckoning dragged hidden clutter into the open before it could keep pretending. The no second home rule stopped objects from drifting through the house like permanent guests. The duplicate purge protected shelves and drawers from being crowded by weak extras. The broken item deadline cut through guilt and false promises. The someday test forced honest decisions about imagined future lives. The laundry basket limit exposed clothing excess. The paper bag sweep stopped thin little scraps from covering the whole house. The useful counter rule protected one of the hardest working spaces in daily life. And the evening walkthrough tied all of it together with steady correction. What made these tricks feel ruthless was not cruelty, it was clarity. Many 1950s housewives did not have the space, money, or time to keep making the same decision over and over. They needed the house to function. They needed drawers to open, counters to work, closets to close, and rooms to recover quickly after a day of family life. Their methods could feel strict, but strict often meant simpler. Fewer objects to manage, fewer floating piles, fewer postponed choices, less visual noise pressing on the mind. That does not mean the era was easy. For many women, the same habits that created order also came with pressure. Homes were judged. Women were judged. Some of the discipline came from pride, but some of it also came from expectation. It is worth being honest about that. The point is not to pretend the 1950s were some perfect answer to every modern problem. The point is narrower and more useful. Certain routines worked. They kept clutter from spreading because they forced quick decisions and steady maintenance. Modern life often offers a different promise. It says more storage will solve the problem. More bins, more shelves, more furniture, more systems, more products. Sometimes that helps, but often it only gives clutter more places to wait. The deeper fix is usually less glamorous, a visible sorting point, one real home per item. Fewer duplicates, a deadline for broken things, less patience for fantasy storage, a limit on laundry drift, fast paper decisions, working counters, small nightly resets. None of that sounds exciting, yet that is exactly why it worked. It lived inside ordinary life. Maybe that is what people still feel when they remember an older home that seemed strangely under control. It was not magic, it was not endless cleaning, it was not some rare gift for organization. It was rhythm, a steady, comforting beat. The room was not calmer because it had less life inside it. It was calmer because life had been guided back into place again and again, before disorder had time to harden. If this brought back a memory of your mother, grandmother, or a home that always seemed easier to breathe in, subscribe, and stay close. There are many more quiet household skills worth remembering, and many of them still fit the homes we live in now. In the end, a lighter house often begins with a smaller decision than people expect. A cleared kitchen table, one honest donation bag, a drawer that finally closes without force, a counter ready for breakfast, a chair that no longer wears half the week. Little signs like that may not look dramatic, but they change how a home feels. And once the house starts feeling lighter, it becomes easier to protect that feeling. That may be the real secret these women understood. The home did not stay under control because they waited for the perfect weekend. It stayed under control because ordinary things were not allowed to become permanent weight.